Expresses his regrets. He is en route from the Congo, and those of you who know Howard know that he is doing some extraordinary work there, as he's done in Burundi and elsewhere on the continent, but was unable to get back to chair this session as he had hoped and intended. Let me just say a few words about the Wilson Center for those of you who don't know the Wilson Center. It was established by an act of Congress in 1968. And is the official memorial to Woodrow Wilson, who many of you know was a scholar as well as a politician, and that he thought the scholar and the policymaker were engaged in a common enterprise. I'm not sure that's always the case, but that's what Woodrow Wilson felt. I shouldn't comment like that. The Wilson Center is a nonpartisan institute for advanced study and a neutral forum for open, serious, and informed dialogue. That I do believe. It's a wonderful institution, has a wonderful set of programs, Africa, conflict, security programs, etc. For those of you not associated and not familiar with the Woodrow Wilson Institute, I urge you to look on their programs, get on their website, and see the terrific programs that take place. Now, today, we have an exceptionally wonderful opportunity to hear from three people who have recently been in Sudan and the region and can comment on the situation there. This discussion is primarily on the Sudan north-south overall situation, not specifically focused on Darfur. We're going to be talking more about prospects more broadly than that. But we can come back for questions later. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to speak for about 10 minutes, so we may have a little conversation up here afterwards and then open it up, and we will end at 3:30. Let me first introduce our first speaker, who is Carla Koppel. Koppel, am I pronouncing that right? Koppel, sorry. She is the director for the Initiative for Inclusive Security. I don't know if people know that institute, but if you don't, you should, because it is an exceptional institution that works on behalf of broad participation in both peace processes and development. And prior to her current position, she was director of the Washington, D.C. office of the Hunt Alternative Funds. And she also was here at the Woodrow Wilson Center. She was Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Affairs at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. She was a Special Assistant to the Administrator of USAID. So she's got a wonderful, terrific background. And I'm going to ask Carla for you to go first.
Thanks so much. I feel a little bit like I'm being auctioned off.
Yeah, well, you know, it's it.
Thanks so much, Princeton. The Initiative for Inclusive Security, as Princeton said, is really dedicated to broadening participation in peace processes. Our philosophy is that peace processes would benefit from bringing in a broader range of stakeholders, and we focus particularly on women and the added value that women could bring to peace building, were they not marginalized often in peace negotiations, though we recognize and have worked a lot around, particularly in Darfur, the idea that peace processes in general should be broader, so that women should be brought in, but also other groups that have been marginalized in negotiating. We were created in '99 and work globally. We have a network of women peace builders that is about 450 strong, and have been active working in Sudan since the beginning of our network, so since 1999. We have then been working with delegations and coalitions of Sudanese women beginning in 2004 in a more intensive way around the signature, at the time of the signature of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. And I will speak for a few minutes just about our most recent trip there. I was there for about 2 weeks. Gosh, when was it? 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago, along with colleagues Evelyn Thornton and Jacqueline O'Neill, who are here as well. And we were really looking at two dimensions. One was, what is the opportunity to enhance the role of women in government and post-conflict reconstruction around the Comprehensive Peace Agreement? and then what are the opportunities for more inclusive Darfur peace agreement, and whether that is creating actual security on the ground, or if it's implementation and trying to move forward with serious implementation of a peace agreement and the longer-term process around that. And essentially, we had 3 different activities. One was a consultation that brought together women from north, south, east, and west, so incorporated folks from Darfur as well as women from north, south, and the east, where the peace agreement recently was signed, to talk to them about what their agenda for change should be. And we're going to circulate for you the outcome from that, which was a very concrete list of priorities that they developed. We also have a list of the participants in that conference. And what I think was really, and it gives contact information, and you should feel free to get in touch with those folks. But I think what was really instructive in that process was to see the ability of these women to really work together. And I know you're going to talk a little bit about the prospects for election and where the CPA is going. The situation has deteriorated since we were there.
Oh, dear.
We last saw one another in Khartoum. But I think what was instructive was that these women, who were as disparate a group of women, as diverse a group of women as you could imagine putting together, from within and outside government and representing all of these different parties, put together this agenda for change. And I won't dwell too much on the anecdotal, and Jackie, you might want to even circulate those while I'm talking. But we had a closing dinner at which we asked the women to bring male policymakers to listen to their agenda for change. And so we had a group of about 80 people, half of them the women we had worked with, and the other half policy community. And I think that the policy community came away feeling that this was about the most positive atmosphere related to the comprehensive peace agreement that they had seen in months in Sudan. And so our takeaway message from that experience was that there's a real opportunity here for the international community to seize in working with functional coalitions like this one to drive this agenda forward. And I will say the postscript to my time there was that the women have continued to meet from all sides of the conflict, from all political parties. They are united in developing an agenda for advocacy around the electoral law, which is currently being considered in Sudan, and in looking at the issue of women's inclusion moving forward. So I think there are groups of people, women among them, who are willing and able to work together in a positive and constructive atmosphere. Our second piece was related to women from Darfur. We brought together about 20 women from throughout Darfur. They included the women who were involved on the government negotiating side, members of the gender expert support team, which was brought in the 7th round of negotiations to provide support to that negotiating process, as well as leaders from civil society from throughout Darfur, and leaders based in Khartoum but from Darfur. Once again, asked them to set aside their differences and work together on an agenda, and once again saw them able to do this. And we will also circulate the agenda that they put together over the course of their collaborative time on how they might collaborate moving forward. And that agenda really speaks to everything from issues related to IDP and refugee camp management through long-term prospects for governance and democracy in the region. So stretches from interim mechanisms like the Darfur Dialogue and Consultation, the joint assessment mission that the World Bank is leading, on through long-term governance questions and reconstruction questions, and demonstrates not only the intellectual value they have to add and the expertise they can bring to the table, but also, once again, this very pragmatic ability to get the job done, to develop an agenda, and to work together, putting aside whatever differences they have when asked to focus on a concrete agenda for peace building. Final thing I will mention was we did, because we felt that there was a lot of momentum, and that was to bring together representatives from Parliament who are of the SPLM and the NCP to talk about forming a cross-party women's caucus within Parliament. And as you may or may know, there are about 60 women within the Parliament from SPLM, and there are actually others from other parties, but we were leading with SPLM and NCP. They also agreed quite pragmatically, and notwithstanding the fact that they're on very different sides of a lot of political debates, to create this caucus, to welcome all comers, so not just SPLM and NCP, but also other parties represented in the parliament, and have also succeeded in starting that work and collaborative process. So what we feel is that there is a, albeit very fragile, but promising foundation among a group of women who are educated people in leadership positions that can be built on to drive forward the peace processes, whether it's the comprehensive peace agreement and post-conflict reconstruction or the Darfur peace agreement. I would just conclude with sort of two lessons each. One on the general issue of the conflict and where we came away thinking about the situation on the ground in Sudan, and then two on women. The first is, I would say that the atmosphere is extraordinarily tense, and it probably has gotten more tense in the subsequent 2 weeks that we've been home. We've seen increasing violence on the ground, whether it's related to Darfur or whether it's related to the comprehensive peace agreement. That having been said, there is enormous will for these peace agreements to succeed among those we worked with. And I do speak to people both within and outside government on all different sides of this conflict. And so I think if that is channeled and harnessed properly, there are real opportunities to move forward. The other issue, which I think may dovetail nicely with what you're going to talk about, is that I perceive there to be, that the process of implementation of the CPA is, and the prospect of elections coming up, is creating cleavages within some of these political parties which are fostering increased democratization on the ground. You see among these women, and this was not a small sample, I mean this was a robust sample of parliamentarians, a real awareness that there are elections coming up, that they do need to be accountable to their constituencies, that they do need to deliver on a platform. In the case of the women, they were cognizant of the fact that there might be an opportunity for them to deliver on a platform related to women, but it didn't necessarily have to be related to women. And that those seeds of a multi-party system where people feel accountable to the general population are there. And that there's an important opportunity for us to foster that, quite apart from whether or not you're focused on women or whether you're focused on the general post-conflict reconstruction process and how to build a successful and sustained democracy in the country. On the issue of women, I would finish by simply saying that we should recognize that embedded in these one-page documents is a real accomplishment by an extraordinarily diverse group of people, demonstrating their ability to work together in a very congenial manner and to create a foundation for long-term cooperation. And too often there is either an inability or an unwillingness to recognize that we should grab on to these groups of people who are not necessarily central in our negotiations and use them as the foundations upon which to create sustainable peace. And so we should look at these documents not only for the words written on the page, but for what they symbolize in terms of the potential and the hope for creating durable peace in Sudan. And I would conclude by simply saying I think implicit in them is a real call to action for all of us to figure out ways to build on these strands of positivism in a country where there's a lot to get stuck on that is negative, in thinking about how we make sure there isn't a return to conflict in the north and the south, and thinking about how we plot a path to peace in Darfur. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Carla. I'm going to turn now to Dave Peterson. Dave Peterson is director of the Africa program of the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a private, incorporated, public-funded grant-making organization in Washington. I think many of you are familiar with it. Dave has been active in Africa for many, many years. He is one of the leading advocates and workers on behalf of democracy and effective democracy on the continent. He was formerly executive director of Project South Africa at the A. Philip Randolph Educational Fund. He's visited over 40 African countries in recent years. I assume he has lots of frequent flyer miles. But Dave, I wonder if, as you talk to particularly the plans for the election, you might just give us a sense of the timetable that's in the CPA and what we're talking about in terms of a framework of things that have to happen.
Mm-hmm. Sure will. Thank you, Princeton. And thank you, Carl. I just want to say that the work that you're doing in your analysis certainly corresponds very closely to what we've been trying to do in Sudan. I just got back from 3 weeks in Sudan. We were in Khartoum, Juba, Ye, and Shendi. So despite the ban on Americans traveling outside of 25 kilometers, it is possible to, with a little bit of creative inquiry, to get around the country. I was there with Joe Tucker, our Sudan Assistant Program Officer. The endowment has been supporting Sudanese civil society groups for nearly 20 years now. We've steadily expanded the program in the last 10 years so that we now have about 24 active partners working throughout the country, including Darfur, Nuba Mountains, Upper Nile, and Juba, other parts of the south. But most of the groups are based in Khartoum. We're supporting civil society groups that are monitoring and promoting human rights, providing legal aid, conducting democracy education and training, nonviolence and conflict resolution training, women's rights and political participation, youth awareness, democratic research and policy, democratic culture, independent press. You get the idea. I will not be so presumptuous this afternoon to offer solutions to any of Sudan's many problems, but I do want to underscore, like Carla, that the predicament is far from hopeless. There are, in fact, many ways that the United States can be helpful in encouraging democratic change in Sudan. A few objective facts are worth noting at the outset. First, Sudan's economy is expanding rapidly. Having traveled in and out of Sudan on many occasions since 1984, I can attest that Khartoum is booming and is almost unrecognizable from the way it used to be not so long ago. The oil money and other forms of investment from China, Malaysia, the Arabian Peninsula, and Europe are transforming the city and the society. In Juba, although there were still no paved roads when we were there to speak of, nor any clean running water, nor electricity, yet we could at least observe that roads are being built, electricity poles are being put up, and that the entire city is really a giant construction project, both by public and private initiative. Juba is like a gold rush town. There are many expatriates living in these outrageously expensive tent cities. Office space is very expensive, but we could at least see that the oil revenues are beginning to have an impact in the south, although there are some very distressing tales of corruption. I think this economic prosperity gives Sudan some significant resources to work with in terms of election and democracy process. On the downside, of course, it could lead to factional competition, corruption, and a lack of accountability to the citizenry, similar as we've seen in Nigeria and Angola. So I think there's a great need for civil servants to get training and support, and anything that can be done to discourage and squash corruption is also important. Secondly, there's a surprising amount of political space in Sudan. Despite some harassment of opposition groups and the violence in Darfur and other parts of the country. Although much of the media is controlled by the government and its sympathizers, there's undeniably an independent press in Sudan, and one is able to keep up even with the latest denunciations by Eric Reeves in the local press. Political parties are active, but they need training. Civil society is vibrant, but could also be strengthened. The government of national unity is a rather dysfunctional system, a kind of two-headed beast that nevertheless deserves nurturing, for it is the only viable mechanism for implementation of the comprehensive peace agreement. Despite the horrific violence in Darfur and the need to maintain pressure on this to cease, the CPA remains a huge achievement in which the U.S. and Sudanese have invested a great deal, and it cannot be allowed to falter or die. If this were to happen, the results could well be an unwinnable civil war that would make the slaughter of Darfur and the previous 50 years of civil war seem like a mere prelude to the ultimate Holocaust. And the implications would be profound, not just for Sudan, but for the entire international community. The recent violence in Malakal is just one of the most recent indications of how volatile the situation remains in the south. One simple suggestion that we heard by Joseph Lagu, prominent southern politician, made a lot of sense to us. He said that Salva Kiir, the vice president, and President Bashir must start making more public appearances together. The government of national unity must become a working reality, and the Sudanese population needs to perceive this. Both sides have much to gain by the CPA, although spoilers abound in both camps. Obviously, many Southerners would prefer to wait out the present until the referendum for self-determination allows them to go their own way, and many Northerners may feel that this would be good riddance. But this outcome would be very problematic, and even if it is virtually inevitable, a maximum level of stability and adherence to the CPA will be necessary for self-determination to occur in a reasonably peaceful way. So whether or not Sudan remains united or there is independence for the South, the CPA must be supported. Some have suggested that the violence from Darfur is spreading to places like Abyei and the Nuba Mountains, and that this is a deliberate effort to sabotage the CPA and eliminate the possibility of elections or the referendum. Another Southerner suggested to us that if it is incumbent upon the North to make unity attractive, it is also necessary for advocates of independence to make self-determination attractive, since corruption and poor governance have not been confined to the North. There must be much more support for the kinds of conflict resolution and negotiation training that the Initiative for Inclusive Security is doing. There should be more North-South dialogue, not only within the government, but at the local level. Unfortunately, the Darfur dialogue seems to lack credibility, but a similar, more extensive, and sort of parallel process could contribute to peace in Darfur. These kinds of processes should encompass the entire scope of Sudanese society, and including all of Sudan's marginalized communities, including even the Janjaweed. Third, and most important of all, the comprehensive peace agreement includes provisions for elections in less than 2 years. No date has been set yet. There seem to be 5 major power blocks in Sudan that will be contesting in these elections. The first, of course, is the ruling National Congress Party, which is campaigning as a guarantor of the CPA and the provider of economic prosperity and good governance. The Sudan People's Liberation Movement, which is the NCP's governing partner, still enjoys the overwhelming support of Southerners, despite concerns about the slowness of implementation of the CPA, some of the SPLM's authoritarian tendencies, and charges of corruption. The 2 traditional parties, the UMA and the DUP, also still seem to retain significant levels of dispute. At least they claim that they do. Although they lack resources and have splintered into many factions. The 5th bloc would include the other southern and northern parties, such as SANU, the SSDF, USAP, the Communists, the Baathists, and Tarabi's Popular Congress. In the event of elections, thus, I find it difficult to imagine that any single one of these blocs would gain a majority. One friend suggested to us that if the SPLM and the southern parties join with some of the progressive northern groups and together backed the SPLM General Secretary, Pagan Amum, that they might stand a chance of winning in the presidential elections, and this would be the best chance of holding Sudan together. And someone else had suggested that it was a bit intriguing that Ahmad Direji, the well-known leader of the Four, might be even more successful in garnering both southern and northern support in national elections. But whether or not there are electoral coalitions formed before the elections, after the elections, it will, I think, be necessary for governing coalitions to be formed. And it will be essential that the SPLM be included in such a coalition. If not, then I think any hopes of a united Sudan would probably be lost. I think this imperative of political coalition building, I think again this sort of echoes some of what Carla was saying, could be a moderating force in Sudan's political development. But unfortunately, we didn't see a lot of this happening just now. Almost none of Sudan's political parties have paid much more than lip service to the conflict in Darfur. As well, the dispute over Abyei is becoming critically explosive. One idea that's been gaining a lot of ground seems to be a national conference of civil society or the political parties or both that would address these kinds of issues. For example, the UMA party would like to reopen the CPA, particularly about the Abyei issue, which the SPLM adamantly opposes, and which the NCP is just sort of dissembling about. So there is a lot that needs to be discussed among these political groups. Free and fair elections in Sudan might seem far-fetched, and the government has yet to pass an electoral code or establish an electoral commission, which is mandated by the CPA. A national census was just getting off the ground while we were there. We saw little evidence of other preparations for elections, but the NCP, at least, is reportedly busy organizing its cadres, and this would suggest that the NCP, at least, is serious about going into elections. International election observers are also provided for in the CPA, although Sudan's 1997 elections had observers, they were not credible observers. Thus, it will be important to confirm the participation of a large, reputable international observation mission, as well as a large domestic observer contingent. Because there are so many strong contending parties, it should be possible to minimize electoral fraud. To the extent that both the NCP and the SPLM seem to believe that they enjoy great popular support, they should accept credible elections as being in their own best interests. I think they could be persuaded of this. There must be much more concerted international support for Sudan's elections, and I should say that many of the endowment's Sudanese partners in both the North and the South are already focusing a great deal on elections. Women's political participation would be especially helpful, as the Initiative for Inclusive Security has pointed out. And again, the endowment is supporting these kinds of activities. Darfur must also be able to participate freely in the elections, even if it means that voters must cast their ballots in the IDP camps. Sudan does have experience with elections. The challenge is formidable, but I don't think it's certainly any worse than the DRC or a lot of other situations. So what does all this mean for Darfur? I am convinced that greater engagement of Sudan's political processes, including the CPA and the DPA, can lead to a sustainable resolution of the conflict. The Darfurians we spoke to made it clear that they want justice, a return to their homes, compensation for their losses, and a greater participation in government. But they also expressed a willingness for reconciliation and to rebuild. One of our interlocutors described the current government as a securocracy, something like, I guess, what we used to call a police state. As in many other countries, there are elites who control most of the power and the resources, and who can be ruthless in trying to hold on to them. They may allow some freedom for opposition groups to voice dissent, as we witness in Sudan, but they will manage and manipulate the system to suit their needs. Only when their power is threatened too seriously will they then take action. Many terrible crimes have been committed in Sudan, and people must be held accountable for them. The Truth and Reconciliation process that has many models throughout Africa and the world. There's a lot of murkiness and rumor, chaos and anarchy in Sudan. Cool heads and statesman-like behavior must prevail and have not been in very abundant supply thus far. But like Carla, I think we met with many talented Sudanese who do have a commitment to democracy, who continue to demonstrate great courage and resourcefulness. I think that Sudan basically just needs a lot of tough love. The stakes are extremely high, but the odds are not impossible, and the U.S. has a lot riding on its success.
Thank you very much, Dave. And now our third and final panelist is Sarah Martin. She's a senior advocate at Refugees International, another very extremely fine organization. She works there to build greater awareness of women's issues and incorporate a gender analysis in refugee situations. She has conducted missions to Uganda, Lebanon, Sri Lanka, Haiti, the DRC, Sudan, West Africa, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. My goodness. She's focused on gender issues in peacekeeping, displacement, HIV/AIDS, etc. Prior to joining Refugees International, she had worked with the Reproductive Health for Refugee Consortium's Gender-Based Violence Global Technical Support Project. Sarah has just recently returned from Uganda and Sudan, and she's been looking at a very important element in this whole situation, and that is the situation with the LRA and Uganda, which impacts on and is impacted on by southern Sudan. So, Sarah, over to you.
As Princeton was saying, I work for Refugees International. For those of you who don't know Refugees International, we're an independent advocacy organization based here in Washington, D.C. We conduct field missions to areas where there is displacement due to conflict, and we spend a lot of time on the ground meeting with, in particular, the refugees and the internally displaced people themselves to find out if their needs are being met, and then we come back here and bring their voices to policymakers to try to advocate for change, to improve their living conditions, with the ultimate goal being that these people can return home. This was Refugees International's fifth mission to northern Uganda since 2002, and this was my second trip to South Sudan this year. I was in South Sudan in March of this year looking at the returns process, and as some of you may know, the Sudan, of course, has one of the largest displacement issues in the world, 500,000 refugees and over 4 million IDPs, internally displaced people. On this trip, we were particularly focused at looking at the conditions in northern Uganda. Since the government of South Sudan has hosted the peace processes, the peace talks in Juba, there's been basically a no peace but no war situation going on in northern Uganda, and we were particularly interested in finding out if this was impacting the humanitarian situation there. For kind of a brief, I'll just give you a brief overview of what's happened in Uganda. The fact is, the government of Uganda has been engaged in military action against trying to pursue the Lord's Resistance Army for almost 20 years now. And they've been unsuccessful despite the fact that they've claimed time and time again they were just this close to getting the Lord's Resistance Army. There was a lot of not a lot of knowledge about the LRA and what it is that they, how strong they were. They're mostly characterized by the fact that they've used abducted children as their combatants, and this is in particular one of the things that makes them particularly ruthless is that it's very difficult for professional militaries to engage with child soldiers and child combatants. They also are very much like a guerrilla organization. They move in small groups and they attack mostly civilian populations. In March, when I was in South Sudan, I was unable to go to Ye, this town near the border with Uganda, where UNHCR, the High Commission for Refugees, had a significant presence to document the returns because the LRA, or what some people said were LRA-like groups, had actually been ongoing attacks in central Equatoria. This had previously been one of the more peaceful areas of South Sudan. This was particularly disturbing. We were able to document refugee movement into Kenya, people fleeing the LRA from central Equatoria, internally displaced people who were being pushed out of central Equatoria much faster than they would have liked to have gone. And in fact, it seemed that LRA activity was stretching all the way from Ye up to Tambora and Yambio along the Central African Republic border. So we were quite concerned that the LRA was really going to disrupt the ability for South Sudan to have peace and to implement the CPA. We were advocating at the time that the UN mission in Sudan should be given an extension in their mandate to go after the LRA and to help to engage with them militarily because of what we believe is a threat by the LRA and the fight with Uganda to the CPA in South Sudan. But luckily, in about April, Riek Machar, the vice president of the government of South Sudan, began engaging in talks with the UPDF and with the Lord's Resistance Army, and is able to bring both sides to a peace process in Juba. This seems to be one of the best chances that we've had for peace on both sides. We heard stories when we were visiting there that the LRA delegation, which is mostly comprised of the diaspora, the Acholi land diaspora, but that they had been quite aggressive in the beginning talks and really speaking out very strongly against the government of Uganda delegation. And they sat there. The government of Uganda delegation was instructed to sit there and to take it. And this is something that we'd never seen before in the past. And it seemed that Museveni's administration was very supportive of finally coming to the table and actually talking peace and trying to settle the situation in northern Uganda. But sadly, we found out last week that the peace talks are they were in recess, and the LRA has refused to come back to the table. I'm not as completely concerned about that as I might be, because while we were in Juba a week ago when we talked with the LRA delegations, none of them had plans to come back until after Christmas anyway. They were all talking about the fact that, it's kind of, we got things to do, and it's quite a disorganized process. When you go there, you'll see. As you were saying about the situation in Juba, just having seen it change in 6 months, there's just been a boom in these tented camps. And in order to find the different participants in the peace process, you basically drive from camp to camp to camp, and they spend a lot of time sitting in the restaurants and chewing the fat and talking to people. And so we had some concerns that the LRA's delegation is maybe not necessarily the most representative of what's happening with Coney. But that aside, this is a process that needs to be supported. It's at a really tenuous point because, as we've been seeing, there's been an uptick in violence around Juba, which had previously not been that dangerous to be around in. There's other armed groups that have been operating around there. In fact, the humanitarian coordinator's secretary was attacked in her car and harassed by groups. People don't believe that this is the LRA because the only action they've seen from the LRA is stopping UNMISS patrols and passing on messages to headquarters. They think that there's a lot of concern that this could be for a number of reasons. One is with security happening in South Sudan along the Uganda border, the trade from Uganda and Kenya has just upticked. It's huge. There are trucks rumbling in every day. There are busloads of people, and every piece of things that you see for sale in the market is all coming from Uganda. So there's some concerns that people in the north would actually like to see South Sudan be much more dependent on the government in the north rather than looking to Uganda as its main trading partner, and that by maybe disrupting the processes down there, that this could force the government of South Sudan to be less able to be independent. The other concern is we have is that the government of South Sudan really is quite, its capacities are stretched. It's a new government. It's really facing a lot of different things that it has to do at the same time, and there's only so much it can do. They've been very resistant to accepting any kind of outside help for mediation on the LRA talks, and that this process is important to them because they cannot be distracted with having ongoing conflicts in the south as well as what's going on in the north. So the Uganda issue needs to be settled, not just for the people of Uganda, but for the people of South Sudan as well. We're concerned because with Jan Egeland, who's been a ceaseless advocate for the people of northern Uganda leaving the UN, he's really been a key force to kind of move the very, very slow UN bureaucracy away to help provide assistance to the peace talks and to he was key to making sure that the UN mission in Sudan would provide helicopters and technical support to the talks to allow people to go back and forth to where Kony and Oti are in the bushes. And with him gone, it's going to be much more difficult to keep the UN moving forward. And also, we would like to see the U.S. continue to support the peace talks. The U.S. has been very, very silent about coming out in positive support of the talks. And we don't necessarily feel that they need to be at the table, but they need to continue to put pressure upon the government of Uganda not to lose hope in the peace process and to return to the military engagement, because we've seen that that doesn't work. And the U.S. is a very strong ally of Uganda, so it's essential that, as well as being an ally to Sudan and making sure the CPA is enforced, that they also continue to bring people to the table in Uganda. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all. Let me just ask a couple of questions here and get it started. Carla, with the groups the women that you were working with, did you sense that their general desire was to see the result of a unified Sudan, or were they prepared to look ahead to the prospect of it dividing in two? I mean, if you're drawing from all parts of the country, what was their mood about that issue?
I would say that in general, there was a commitment to trying to maintain a unified government. But I would say that particularly among those in the South, in the government, there was a great deal of frustration with the lack of progress. That was bordering on losing faith. And I think some of the Northerners for example, in other parties, non-National Congress Party Northerners, were equally frustrated with the lack of progress on some of the key issues related to the Petroleum Commission, the Civil Service Commission, IEA, as you mentioned. So my sense in general was they still remain committed to, there's certainly a willingness to go it alone, but they remain committed to the government of national unity, but with increasing levels of frustration. One thing I would say with regard to the sample I'm drawing from is that we didn't have as many of the folks from government of Southern Sudan as we would have liked. And I don't know what impact that would have had on the perspective of the group that we had together. We had some representatives, but not as many as we would wanted. So,
thanks. Let me just ask a question of you, Dave. One thing that I find striking is that while there's a lot of concern about Darfur, let's say here in the United States and in the UN, I don't get the sense that those who are working on the North-South issues, CPA, in Sudan, see Darfur as interfering with that process. You would think they would. They think that settling Darfur is a high priority. But the government pursues its Darfur policy. The Southerners are worried, understandably, about the South, consolidating their government, etc. Why not? Is it because Darfur really doesn't impact very much on what's going on in the rest of the country? Is it because donors continue to put money into the CPA, not conditioned on progress in Darfur? Why isn't Darfur, in other words, a higher priority in Sudan compared to elsewhere?
That's the exact question that we asked many of our friends in Sudan, and I'm not sure that we got a good answer. It depends on who you talk to. Among some Southerners, they would say, well, the Darfurians were fighting us in the North-South war, and so we don't have too much sympathy for their problem. We just want our independence, and so therefore, it's the Darfurians' problem and not ours. With the Umma Party people, they have a great constituency in Darfur, and one would have expected them to be much more exercised about the problem there, but the people that we talked to were suggesting that, well, yeah, sure, we're concerned about Darfur, but every time we, try to make a fuss, the government sort of clamps down on us, and I think that it's probably more an indication of the weakness of the Umma Party that they're not able to do more about the problem than anything else. Even among the NCP people that we talked to, or some other Southerners, I think there's just not a sense that, and maybe it's because of the government's ability to control information, that there's just not that much of an understanding that there is a crisis there. There's not an understanding of why is the international community so bothered about this? Why is the U.S. so bothered about it? That's just some of the reasons, I think.
I just wanted to add briefly, I think you phrased it just right. There's very much there's a great willingness to distinguish between the two as completely discrete and to focus on one or the other. Never the twain shall meet. One interesting thing I would note was that, not within the context of our work, some of the parliamentarians came back and said that there was a big discussion within Parliament about the situation in Darfur, and that there was very heated debate among NCP parliamentarians and a great deal of dissension over the issue of Darfur that was quite openly on display in the parliamentary session, and that it was an interesting indication of fissures within the NCP around the issue of Darfur and a willingness of party members to speak out, which sort of speaks to your earlier comments about the process of democratization and where the NCP is going.
And just one question for Sarah, if I may. Did the issue of the ICC come up in your discussions, both with the Southern Sudanese involved in this process and the Ugandans, and how do they see that?
The ICC comes up anytime you mention northern Uganda, whether you're talking to an IDP, a refugee, or the people in the peace talks.
Are people familiar with the fact the International Criminal Court has issued indictments against some of the LRA?
This is certainly going to be a huge sticking point for the peace process. The Vincent Oddie and Joseph Kony, the two leaders who are indicted, cannot come to Juba to be present at the peace talks because they fear that they will be arrested by the ICC. There's a lot of misinformation and lack of clarity and lack of understanding about what it means. Jan Egeland brought a human rights lawyer, Barney Achako, to the bush where Kony and Oti were to read them, to show them the actual warrants for their arrest, because they haven't even seen those. So there's a lot of education that needs to happen on the LRA side. In the meantime, everyone's kind of hoping that the talks will go very, very slowly, and that if they rush into the talks too fast, they're going to hit the ICC issue right away, and that's going to cause it all to undo. There's kind of two camps about the ICC. One is that the Security Council should have a one-year deferral of the warrants to allow the peace process to move forward, which is what a lot of the people in northern Uganda want. The people in northern Uganda feel like they just want peace. They're so tired of having their children abducted, of being abused, of living in these horrific IDP camps in northern Uganda. They just want to go home and they just want peace. They're willing to deal with the perpetrators when they come back. But at the same time, this is such a key case for the ICC. Mm-hmm. If they defer the warrants, or if they allow the amnesty process in Uganda to supplant the international criminal justice mechanisms, then every human rights abuser in the world will be able to find some loophole or some reason that they won't come to the peace talks unless the warrants are deferred. So everyone's hamstrung about this. Everyone is looking for the magic solution, the solution that no one's thought of yet, that everyone is curious about. For our own organization, we also are hamstrung by this. We're having internal discussions about it because, in particular, I interviewed 2 young child soldiers who had been abducted when they were about 11 years old, 2 young men. They had been with the LRA for 10 years. They had just been released the month before and had been sitting in UPDF barracks where they had been interrogated time and time again. And looking at their eyes and looking at their faces and listening to the fear in their voices, and they asked me a question I could not answer. They said, is there any place where we can go where we'll be safe? And until the people who perpetrated this injustice on the people of northern Uganda are brought to justice, I really don't know if there can be peace.
All right. Let me open it up, and would you please indicate your name and affiliation when you ask a question, and let's open it up. Who would like to start? Such a group. Yes, sir. We got a microphone. We got a microphone coming. This is a very well organized institute.
Good afternoon. My name is Nuruddin Manan. I'm from Sudan Human Rights Organization. Sorry I came late and I missed also the contribution of Ms. Carla and also a part of Mr. Peterson's presentation. I'm coming here to address some issues concerning the Sudanese organizations here. They are not consulted or they are not actually involved directly in the decision making or even brainstorming and so on. I attended many meetings at this institution and USIP and everywhere. And it's very important to use the experience and the wisdom of the insiders who know their people, the mentality of the people of over there and how they think and how they maneuver and so on. This is very crucial and important if you want to come to very concrete steps. Unfortunately, during my stay here in US for the last 17 years, we made so many suggestions and proposals about handling or dealing with the terrorism. And I remember just 8 days before September 11, I was in the State Department with Sudan desk officers and told them that you are shedding lots of effort in issues like slavery, whereas there is a very fatal or a very big enemy just trying to jump on you here. Bin Laden, we have been repeating and repeating about the terrorism, and still this is an issue. Nobody can ignore the issue of terrorism. In Sudan, they are still active. They hide, they go to their heights when they face an international.
I appreciate, but if you have a question, you could ask.
Yes, my question.
And then we'll come back.
I will ask a general question about why don't you make a task force including some Sudanese and from also Horn of Africa and the Lakes area, just to brainstorm and also discuss these issues every now and then so that you can come out with good ideas. It's not enough to send professionals or diplomats 10 times or 5 times or so on to come back and feed you here. This is very dangerous because there will be so many loopholes in the ideas you get from them.
Right. Okay.
Also, let me issue the issue of Chad and Sudan is also very important. If you want to handle the Darfurian issue, you need to send delegations and experts to Chad and Central African government and the area to know the situation over there. There are so many complicated tribal issues and on the border. The last one is about the election in Sudan. There's a group called the Sudanese Marginalized Forces for Peace and Development. It's a newly formed. It was formed about 2 years ago, and they are making some contacts in Sudan and here and in Europe. This group is actually moving around the new Sudan vision advocated by late Dr. John Garang. these are mainly the democratic and progressive movements who are trying to forge an alliance, a big alliance, to make a change in the coming election and so on. And they need the support from the international, from the free world in general.
Okay.
If you don't come to help them, the Islamists or the terrorists will come back and they will give you a hard time, even worse than September 11th. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to comment on that group familiar to you at all, David?
It's not one that we came across. We'll certainly be interested in finding out more about them and having contact with them.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and
Thanks.
I would just add
please.
that I would encourage you to be involved in the Save Darfur Coalition, which is a very broad-based organization of a number of different groups, and we're always looking for more people that are Sudanese to come back and represent the voice, because you're right, it is very difficult when you have people who don't completely understand the culture representing it, and so please come join.
Good. Yes, right here.
Oh, actually, I wasn't raising my hand, but I will ask a question.
I'm sorry. Well, take that one, and then we'll come back to that, gentleman.
My name's Jeff Morrissey, and I work for Executive. My name's Jeff Morrissey. I work for Executive Research Associates, and had a question, I think, on the whole peace process in northern Uganda. There have been reports. There's a person named Milton Okidi Olal Jongamoy, and there are reports that he works for either the UN, the LRA, the United States, or himself, and he seems to be at the center of these negotiations, and I don't know what is happening with this man. If anyone could comment on that, it would be appreciated.
Is that someone you've heard of?
No, sorry. There's so many people that are involved, and particularly from the LRA, and there's the 14 people who sit in the actual negotiation table, and then there's a huge number of observers and different groups that are coming up. And I didn't mean to mention, if I can take this opportunity, to hook on to what Carla was saying. While I was in Gulu and Kitgum, I encountered the Ugandan women's groups that were marching to Juba to bring the peace torch up there to demand that the voices of women be represented in the Ugandan peace talks as well. Just as it's important in Sudan, it's also important in Uganda. The lead negotiator for the LRA delegation is a woman, but the government of Uganda doesn't have any women on its staff. And just having a woman being the negotiator does not necessarily mean that the women's voices are included. We asked the LRA delegation, did they feel like they spoke for the women that were there, and they assured us that they did. But so
Is Betty Begomi not involved at all anymore?
no.
Not at all. Okay.
I
Jen-
should say, Jeff,
please.
I do know Okidi. In fact, he was the founder of NGO that we've supported, the Low Development Incorporated, which I think is very interesting because they were one of the first popularizers, I think, of the Matu Oput ceremony, sort of traditional reconciliation. And then I think Okidi had been working with the Carter Center. That's how we were introduced to him in some of the very early negotiations with the LRA. But
Gentleman,
he's a bit of an enigmatic figure, I have to agree.
sounds like it. Gentleman right there.
Thank you. You said that...
Could you introduce
yeah,
yourself?
Karim Mansouri from the Moroccan Embassy. You said that there's several ways to help Darfur and Sudan, and among them, the training of civil servants. Can you talk a little bit more about the specific needs in
Well, I think, as my fellow presenters have suggested, Southern Sudan is really starting from scratch. The leadership of the SPLM know how to fight a guerrilla war very well, but they're not necessarily the best parliamentarians or administrators of bureaucracies. And so I think there's a fair amount of work that's already going on to train both legislators and local government officials, but there is still an enormous need. I mean, I think a lot of the problems with the slow implementation of the CPA in the South and a lot of the problems with corruption are probably a result of the lack of experience. I mean, some of the legislators don't even have secondary grade educations. So there's just an enormous need there to build up civil servants.
I would add, I think that one of the things we saw that in the Government of National Unity, for example, very basic things like Arabic training for the Southern parliamentarians who speak, Arabi Juba and can't digest the information that's coming through Parliament quickly enough to be able to play an effective role in the parliamentary process. And I've mentioned that example because there's very little resource in the international community to provide language support. But the problem is if you think of it just as language support, you say, oh, I don't want to support that. If you think of that as how do you build a flourishing democracy and encourage real engagement in a political process, then you understand that it's not just about language. But my sense was everything from sort of separation of powers to how to run an office and how a bill becomes a law and what the contracting process needs to be and how you can fulfill your fiduciary responsibilities. One of the things I was asked was if given in the North a very stagnant civil service in which you have very little ability to create incentives for your staff and you have a civil service that's been politicized over time, what are the organizational management structures and other incentive systems you can put in place that will reinvigorate your civil service so that they really want to deliver and perform? So very nuts and bolts operational questions.
Let's go over to this side. Move late right here, Oren. The microphone's coming.
Oh, sorry. Oren Weichi Shaw, U.S. Treasury. I have two questions. One with respect to the institutional capacity building for the unity government, both in Khartoum as well in Juba. Did you see any impact on the multi-donor funds that are managed by the World Bank that are in place specifically to address some of those issues? That's one. Two, you discussed or have raised the opportunity for the international community to affect the peace agreement. Oftentimes, economic partnerships are equally empowering, if you will, or important. And so I was wondering, one, if any of you talked with the Chinese, the Malaysians, and the Indians that are in Sudan.
Two good questions.
Mm-hmm. On the issue of the multi-donor trust fund, I have been trying for a very long time to get information on the civil service support work of the multi-donor trust fund without success. And I have not, frankly, seen, though I heard about this prior or just as it was being initiated, I have seen little evidence of its impact. And even in speaking with the multi-donor trust fund people, there's not a lot of documentation of support for the civil service. So I have not been successful, and I wish I had more to say. I think, frankly, the concept, which was both to support training of the civil service and also to provide some salary support to beef up the capacity of the civil service to attract a solid core of professionals, was a fabulous idea. And one just as an aside, I was personally interested in the concept exporting the concept to Liberia, because we work in Liberia as well. But I haven't been able to find the documentation or evidence that it has really made significant inroads. We didn't meet with the Chinese, Malaysians, and Indians, although we talked about trying to reach out to the Chinese and sort of ran out of time. But I completely agree with you that I think there's enormous opportunity. Frankly, our organization has actually gotten support from the Chinese for some of our work in Latin America. So there is interest within the Chinese government on some of the things that we're working on. I cannot give you insight into what drove that, but we've worked with the Chinese through the Organization of American States and our work there. So it's on our list, but I can't speak specifically to it.
Yeah, we heard some stories about people getting assistance from this fund. I think getting some training, but no real documentation of it. On these economic partnerships, I think I would just say that certainly in Khartoum, the absence of any American investment or presence there is quite striking compared to most other parts of Africa. I mean, you've got Pepsi-Cola and Coca-Cola, and that's about it that I could see. In the South, I mean, it's just, barely getting off the ground. So, yeah. I thought it was very interesting that we were told that, one of the big problems with the Sudanese economy is that you can't use a credit card anywhere. And that seems to be a result of American sanctions somehow. So that seems to be, probably one of the most impactful results of American sanctions on Sudan.
That's interesting.
I'd just like to make a comment too about being careful about with the Chinese investment in South Sudan. When I was there in March, we documented displacement in Malut, in the oil field companies there, that where the Chinese oil explorations were going on, and they are a big, huge player in Sudan. All you have to do is go to the Sudanese Khartoum airport, and there's just room after room after room of Chinese businessmen heading down to the oil fields there. And without a balanced, another partner there to provide economic incentives that respect human rights and respect the rights of the Sudanese people to live free of violence, we're very concerned about the Chinese influence in Sudan.
Gentleman in the corner of the table right there, and then we'll get people along the back.
Thank you, panel. Charles Sentongo is my name from Uganda Embassy. First of all, let me restate here our government's position that we are still in for the peace talks. We very strongly support the efforts of the mediator. We believe that by coming to a peaceful settlement will not only be helping the situation in northern Uganda, but also stabilizing the situation in southern Sudan, so that the political process in southern Sudan moves in whatever direction the people of southern Sudan like. Related to that was the issue, that is the issue which has been touched on. A gentleman asked, who is Mr. Olala Okidi? I mean, Dave gave an answer about their knowledge. Well, Olala Okidi is one of the players in the peace process in southern Sudan. He's one of those people in diaspora. But I think it's important for people here to know, how did he come to that process? Our government had been making it known to the U.S. government of the negative role Olala Okidi has been playing or had been playing in the northern Ugandan politics. He is actually one of the main funders of the LRA terrorist campaign that has been waged. The facts are there. Our government brought to the attention of the American government, especially when we learned that he claims or he regards himself as an employee of the American government. And as we speak now, he's among those people who are in the category of spoilers, trying to eschew the peace process into their own direction or interest. Then lastly, I would like to ask members of the panel, Sarah touched on the issue of a certain militia along the southern-northern border. Nobody seems to be addressing the issue of the militia, because what you see in Sudan as a result of the civil war, the central government armed a number of militias as a counterforce to the SPLA. And whether in Darfur or in southern Sudan, I think they have done more harm than even the regular army. What's your assessment? You have been saying political parties, but you don't seem to make any reference to the role of those militias. What's your assessment in terms of their role in spoiling or affecting the peace process and events in Sudan?
Thank you. Sarah, you want to comment on that?
Sure. In March, most of the talk about the violence that was going on around Juba and in Ye, people said it was LRA activity. But as the intelligence came in more and more and more again, it did seem to be a lot of disgruntled SPLA, former SPLA soldiers and militias, as you were saying. Without having the DDR process, the disarmament process in the Sudan has been going very, very slowly. And I think the case in in Malakal, the clash that just happened in Malakal is an example of what will happen without having an effective disarmament process. The militias, there's still so many guns running around all over South Sudan. There's very little control. The SPLA is reluctant to address all the different militias that are running around because there's just so many different armed factions that are still operating in South Sudan. So I agree with you in the fact that the militias are something that will be spoilers to the peace and need to be addressed sooner rather than later. There are some blockages to the disarmament process going forward, but many of those are also political will blockages. Both the government in Khartoum and the government in South Sudan needs to be more serious about moving the DDR process forward and getting many of these militias either integrated back into the armies or disarmed and reintegrated into the community. And that is a serious threat to the peace there.
Did you get the impression, Sarah, as to who was supporting the militias? Are they getting support from, as the gentleman said, from the government of Sudan anymore, or?
Well, I did not document, this was not the key reason why I was there, but certainly that was a lot of the rumors and the information that we heard, but I have not seen anything concrete that would suggest that that's the case, but we certainly heard that a lot.
Right. Lady right here. Just wait for the microphone, then I'll get the gentleman back there. I think, are there anybody? Oh, and then they'll come over here to this side. Okay, good.
Thank you. My name is Mkawasim Charo from the Kenyan community abroad. My question, I have two questions. One, why has the government of Uganda taken so long to arrest the LRA issue? Two, who is arming the LRA?
That might be better addressed to my colleagues at the end of the table, but who is arming the LRA? In the past, there was very strong evidence that the government in Khartoum was indeed behind supporting the LRA. We documented in March and in February that children that had been released from the LRA, as well as other combatants, spoke about seeing, Arabic-speaking people from the north who were sending guns and weapons there. I'm not an expert on this issue by any means. I'm a humanitarian worker who focuses primarily on displacement issues. And why has Uganda taken so long to address this? I do believe, this is my personal belief, is that there was just a belief that they could be handled militarily. I think that over and over again the LRA has been underestimated its strength. We spoke with UNMISS military officials in Juba on this last trip who said, we estimate that they have about 2,700 armed forces there, and they're extremely professional. We've seen them operating in an extremely tight professional military way, and the propaganda and the belief that they were just a kind of crazy group that were out there attacking people has been disproved. The SPLA soldiers themselves are quite reluctant to engage them militarily because they've just proven to be stronger than most people realized.
We take the gentleman in the far corner and then come over on this side.
Thank you. My name is Salah from Embassy of Sudan. Thank you very much. First, I would like to have some comment on some of the panelists sneaking. It's not sneaking in Sudan now. This restriction has been applied to the best of my knowledge for less than 5 cases. Restriction of movement in Khartoum. As diplomats here, we have been through this for 3 years, restricted here. We couldn't move outside the United States. We are not going to repeat the same thing. Diplomats are always envoys of peace. And assure the panelists that this has been lifted. It's applied for less than 5 cases and it's been lifted. Because the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Sudan sees that communication between the people, between the civil societies and all these things is very conducive to peace and to the political stability in Sudan. Second, just the first question is about possibilities of political alliances in Sudan after 2 years of elections. You've been exploring many possibilities. I just would like to mention that the possibility of a coalition between the SPLM and NCP. And this is a possibility. It never comes in through your analysis because both of them are parties to the CPA and they are parties who have a great stake in the transitional period. And this is quite a possibility there, because if you have another political alliance in Sudan, that the CPA itself might be in jeopardized. Third question, or third point about accusation of Sudan government involvement in LRA. And this has been for a long time. We've been through this for so many years. And just two facts, I just state two facts, that we have a peace agreement with the South, with all the other things about it. We endorse that any peaceful conclusion to the conflicts in the areas is the best means to have peace. Second, we are allowed the Ugandan government military to operate in the South. And this has never has been done by any government, just to show that we are ready and we are ready to assist our brothers in northern Uganda and the Ugandan government. We have a cooperation with them, so we could settle this dispute peacefully. So any rumors about implications and all these things is just spreading rumors. We don't see any reason why we are having a CPA with the South. The South government now is full control of the South, and then we support others. And this is not in our political agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to comment on that alliance possibility?
Well, you know, I think the idea of an NCP-SPLM alliance is a very interesting one. As I think in the current period, with the government of national unity, that alliance does need to be reinforced and made to work. As I had suggested before, you know, and the idea of Salva Kiir and President Bashir touring the country together to demonstrate that unity, I think is a good one. If the SPLM and the NCP can learn to work together, then I think the prospects for Sudan as a whole are very good.
Let me come over to this side. We have two people here, gentleman here, gentleman here.
My name is Adil Saleh. I'm from Sudan. Thank you for the opportunity, and I think, you know, just representative of the Sudanese government, he did his job. But anyway, I have two questions today. You can consider me one of the people working in the fifth group in your analysis of the blocking. I mean, the fifth block. Mm-hmm. I see one of the CBA problem to me. It is a mutual interest of the NIF government and the SPLA in one thing. It came to us, Muslim, to me as a disaster, because it put really the secession of the South in order. Because it put it like this: okay, you have the South run by a secular government and the North as the Islamic State. So for NIF, the support Bin Laden and all this, the history of it, you know it, they are interested in getting an Islamic State. So what we being saying all along, U.S. government and all the people happy with the CBA, they will end up sponsoring the first Islamic State in Africa, because the South will go. And we end up with an Islamic State sponsored by the international community. An Islamic State sponsored Bin Laden and all others. So I think any talk about democracy and all this with such things, I think really we have to rethink about it and how you can, you know, just put these things back. That's why the Ummah Bari and DUB, as they have an Islamic base, as you know. That's why they're not encouraging about doing anything. So maybe the SPLA, they're waiting for the 3 years or 6 years to secede, and then the NCB and the other party, they're waiting to get their Islamic State in the north. And this is one of the problems. I don't know what you think about it. Thank you.
Let me take the question here, and then we'll comment on that, because we're coming close to the end. The gentleman right here, it's an important issue he's raised, but let's get the other question in too, because we're coming close to the end.
How are you? Omar Abdul Malik from Harvard University. And my question has something to do with some of the statements that have been made previously. But my question is this: does the labeling of some Sudanese as Arab and others as black add negatively to the conflict? And has anyone sought to study the historical and psychological roots of this alternative or differing identities of this group of Africans as part of a solution to the problem?
Yeah, I think, and I'd like to hear particularly how the women were treating that set of questions. So, Dave, do you want to take that first one, and then we'll turn to the other panelists?
Well, I mean, I think certainly if the SPLM and Southerners decide that they are better off going their own way, that the chances are that the NCP and the other Islamist parties, DUP and UMA, would dominate the North, and I think that would be unfortunate. In fact, I think it could be problematic. I also think that it's probably the most likely outcome at this stage. But I think that if there are more statesmanlike leaders in both the North and the South who understand that unity is in the best interests of all the people of Sudan, that they will concentrate themselves on how to achieve that. I mean, I think the idea of, say if the NCP were to run, Salva Kiir or Pagan Amum, as the presidential candidate in a coalition, electoral coalition, then I think that there's a real possibility that not only would you have a united Sudan, but you would have a secular Sudan. Maybe that's a very far-fetched, pie-in-the-sky notion, but I think it's that kind of, very creative and thinking that's going to be necessary. Otherwise, the easy thing for Sudanese to do is just to allow the North and South to part ways, and I think that would be a disaster.
Well, Sarah, you want to comment on the other?
Sure, I can go first. I think your question about the dimensions of how the Darfur conflict in particular have been portrayed are very interesting, because I do think that the conflict in Darfur is much, much, much more complex and difficult to understand than the way that it's portrayed. One of the problems of it is that in order to mobilize action, most people who are working to try to solve the conflict and to draw international attention to it have to put it into the terms that people can relate to. And that was the key to success to mobilizing U.S., and I'm speaking just from the U.S. perspective, mobilizing U.S. attention towards the North-South conflict was making it a fight against Arab Muslims versus African Christians in the South. I have been to Darfur several times, and when I've been there, I spent a lot of time talking with displaced women in the camps there, and the conflict definitely has some racial connotations on the fact that we've heard women being threatened with rape, saying we'll make you a lighter baby, we will, we will make sure that you're. But there are Arabs versus lighter, yeah. Anyway, so there is somewhat of that dynamic, but in general, I think certainly Alex DeWall, one of the main critics who've looked at this, has said a lot of times it's a struggle over resources, limited resources, to access to water, to access to land, to access to be able to maintain traditional livelihoods, and that's a lot less sexier to talk about when you're talking about ending a genocide than it is to make it a one culture clash versus another. But there are definitely the elements in there of the racial dynamics as well.
I think your point is a really important one, and I think there are two dimensions. As to who is looking at it, I don't have the answer. But what I've seen, not only in Sudan, but I can say the same is true in Iraq, was that often the women we've worked with really want to downplay that. They feel themselves to be Sudanese, they feel themselves to be Iraqi, and they are forced into boxes by the international community, which is seeking to label them and classify them. But not only women, I mean, even the negotiating parties. So we are going to create X number of of slots in this conference for this ethnic group, this religious group, this geographic segment of the country. And so which one do you fall in so that we can classify you appropriately? And it is an endless source of frustration to the women that I've encountered that they are unable to simply identify with the national label that everybody is saying they want them to identify with. And I think it exacerbates very much the fissures within these societies, and emphasizes that their differences are a source of dissension, rather than that their diversity is a source of strength. And I think it creates problems. And it's so acute in Sudan that when we were just there 2 weeks ago, several of the women of different shapes and sizes came up and said, what do I do when I am meeting with an international person who asks me where I am from? And I say, Sudan. And they say, oh yeah, I know that. But, where do you come from? Who are you? And they say, we just tend to continue to say Sudan. And I said, well, that probably isn't a good answer, because then they think you haven't understood the question. You might want to say that, this is, if you want this sort of, classifier, this is it. But let me tell you, I feel Sudanese. I don't feel northern or southern. I don't feel Muslim or Christian. I don't feel like I'm from north, south, east, or west. And I think it's a real problem in the way negotiations are teed up. I mean, it's a very profound, I know you're looking at it from a psychosocial angle, but I'm looking, I think that there's a very profound problem, because I think we recreate divisions that in some cases are dissolving by virtue of the way we create the Iraqi Governing Council, or by virtue of the way we distribute the seats in a negotiation.
And if I could just add one thing too, sorry, I saw you moving to wrap us up.
Go ahead.
That this also has impacts on the provision of services. A very concrete example is humanitarian services in Darfur. No NGO or UN agency wants to be seen as providing services to the Arab herders, who also, the women and children there, are also struggling for lack of access to food, and they're also victims of the conflict as well, which is why it's important to maintain strict humanitarian principles to deliver aid to those in need, rather than choosing sides in these conflicts.
Carla has one.
I was just mentioning very, very quickly that we're having Sudanese and Ugandan women here in conjunction with something we called our colloquium in early January. So there will be delegations of women from Sudan and Uganda, all working at different levels of government. And if you're interested in finding out more about that and participating in that, speak to me or Evelyn or Jacqueline, and that'll be in the first half of January. So I just wanted to make sure you were all aware.
Let me just make a quick comment on the question that raised, because in addition to how people are mobilized into different identities, either because of the international community or because of the organizing of politics, it's also a way of organizing people for war. And therefore, to mobilize people and to feed a certain kind of identity, et cetera, that also takes place. And I think to some extent that took place in Darfur. Although I think Sarah's point is very important, because we tend to think of the Janjaweed representing a particular racial nomadic group, when in fact within that community there is not a large support for the Janjaweed. They are drawn from an element, but that doesn't mean they represent that whole community. So a lot of things get mixed up in this kind of a situation. We touched on a lot of issues. I very much appreciate the panel, appreciate all of you being here. This has been very instructive, and I think what it does underline from all the different comments it's made how terribly important the Sudan situation is, how terribly important these processes are. How they will go not only impacts on Sudan and the people of Sudan, will impact on that whole region and that whole interplay that Sudan plays between the Middle East and Africa. So these are very important issues. And for all of you involved, I encourage you to stay involved. And thank you very much. Thanks to the Woodrow Wilson Center, and thanks again to our panel. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Good work. Good work. How Swanee these days?
It was bound the 1st of
I got the
November.
book out and I missed the book thing because I had a conflict.
It's a
Hey, good to see you.
we're actually leaving Liberia.
We were in Sudan. Yeah, we saw, I mean,
Give me my book. I said, well, I really felt bad about missing your book event here.
it sounds like, Shro is alive and well.
It's a good place to be. Hi. Well, this is Evelyn's card, and you can reach me through Evelyn. But absolutely, we're most active in Colombia, and we do a lot of work in Colombia. We do have members in lots of places throughout the region. We just finished some partnership with OAS.